Good morning, Boker Tov, Shabbat Shalom. So great to be here with everyone. Welcome to everybody on Zoom, on YouTube, and on Facebook. Last night, Rabbi Miriam talked a little bit about what it means to create our own sanctuary, our own mikdash. And we know the concept of kodesh or mikdash in Judaism comes from the term kodesh, which means to separate oneself. And during this time, as Rabbi Miriam so eloquently stated, it's been so difficult because we're not in our physical mikdash altogether, but we take a moment every Shabbat to separate ourselves, whether it's in maybe a different room of our houses or apartments, perhaps we wear different clothing, or even we are separating our headspace from the rest of the week. And so we start off this Shabbat morning with Modeh Ani on page 186.
Modeh Ani lefanecha melech chai v'kayam. Modeh Ani lefanecha melech chai v'kayam.
We turn to page 194 for Asher Yatzar. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, Asher yatzar et ha'adam b'chachma, uvrebo nekavim nekavim, chalulim chalulim, galui v'yadua lifnei kisei kivodecha, she'im yiftach echad mehem, o yistam echad mehem, I efshar lhitkayem ule'amod lefanecha. Praise to you, Adonai our God, sovereign of the universe, who formed the human body with skill, creating the body's many pathways and openings. It is well known before your throne of glory that if one of them be wrongly opened or closed, it would be impossible to endure and stand before you. Baruch atah Adonai, rofei kol basar umafli la'aset. We turn the page for Elohai Nishama.
Elohai Neshama shenatata bi Tehorai. Elohai Neshama shenatata bi Tehorai. Ata birata, ata yetzarta, ata nefachta bi, ve'ata mishamra bikirbi, ve'ata atid litla mimeni ulechazira biletid navo. Kol zeman she'neshama bikirbi, Modeh Ani lefanecha, kol zeman sheneshama bikirbi, Modeh Ani lefanecha. Adonai Elohai v'Elohei avotai, שנתת בי, טהורה היא אלוהי, נשמה שנתת בי, טהורה היא.
We turn to page 198 for the daily miracles. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, who has given the mind the ability to distinguish day from night. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, who opens the eyes of the blind. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, who frees the captives. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, who uplifts the fallen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, who stretches the earth over the waters. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, who strengthens our steps. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, malbish arumim. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, hanoten le'yaif koach. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, hamavir shena me'inai utnuma me'afapai. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, sha'asani b'tselem Elohim. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, sha'asani ben chorin. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, sha'asani Yisrael. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, ozer Yisrael bigvuraha. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, oter Yisrael b'tifara.
Amen. Please join me on page 204 for the blessing for the study of Torah. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kiddeshanu b'mitzvotav, v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. O Adonai our God, let the words of Torah be sweet in our mouths and the mouths of your people Israel, so that we, our descendants, and the descendants of all your people Israel may know you, by studying your Torah for its own sake. Blessed are you, Adonai, who teaches Torah to your people Israel. Baruch atah Adonai, hamelamed Torah le'amo Yisrael. We continue on page 206. These are things that are limitless, of which a person enjoys the fruit of the world, while the principle remains in the world to come. They are honoring one's father and mother, engaging in deeds of compassion, arriving early for study, morning and evening, dealing graciously with guests, visiting the sick, providing for the wedding couple, accompanying the dead for burial, being devoted in prayer, and making peace among people. But the study of Torah encompasses them all. We continue on page 212, beginning our Psukei de Zimra, our verses of praise, with Baruch She'amar. Baruch She'amar v'haya olam, Baruch Shemo, Baruch Oseh v'Reishit, Baruch Omer v'Oseh, Baruch Gozer u'Mekayem, Baruch Merachem al haaretz, Baruch Merachem al habriot, Baruch Meshalem Sachar Tov Lireyav, Baruch Chai La'ad V'Kayam Lanetzach, Baruch Podeh U'Matzil, Baruch Hu, Baruch Shemo, Baruch Atah Adonai Melech Mehulal Batishbachot, Baruch atah Adonai Melech Mehulal Batishbachot. Blessed are you, Adonai, sovereign who is glorified through praise.
We turn the page for Mizmor Shir on page 214.
Mizmor Shir leyom HaShabbat, Mizmor Shir leyom HaShabbat, Mizmor Shir leyom HaShabbat, Elai, 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 Elai. Mizmor Shir leyom HaShabbat, Mizmor Shir leyom HaShabbat, Mizmor Shir leyom HaShabbat, Elai, 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 Elai. Tov להודות לאדוני, ולזמר לשמך עליון, להגיד בבוקר חסדך, ואמונתך בלילות. עלי אסון ועלי נבל, עלי היגיון וכינון, עלי אסון ועלי נבל, עלי היגיון וכינון. מזמור שיר ליום השבת, מזמור שיר ליום השבת, מזמור שיר ליום השבת, אלי, 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 אלי. צדיק התמר יפרח, וארז בלבנון יזכה, שתולים בבית אדוני, בחצרות אלוהינו יפריחו, עוד ינובון בשיבה, דשנים ברעננים יהיו, להגיד כי ישר אדוני, צורי ולא הגלתה בו. מזמור שיר ליום השבת, מזמור שיר ליום השבת, מזמור שיר ליום השבת, אלי, 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 אלי.
We turn the page to Ashrei, reflecting on how lucky and praiseworthy we are to be able to be in such a community. Ashrei Yoshrei Beitecha, Od Yehalalucha, Selah.
אשרי העם שככה לו, אשרי העם שאדוני אלוהיו.
Tehillat lalavid aromincha, Elohai HaMelech, Rabba Shimcha Liolam Va'ed.
בכל ימיו אחיך, והללה שמך לעולם ועד.
Gadol Adonai Umeolal Me'od, Guli Tulato Ein Cheker.
גדול ישבח מעשיך, וגבורותיך יגידו.
Adar Kevod Hodacha, V'divrei Niflotecha Asicha.
ועזוז נורותיך יאמרו, וגדולתך אספרנה.
Zecher Rav Tucha Yabiu, Vetzidkacha Yeranenu.
חנון ורחום אדוני, ערך אפיים וגדול חסד.
Tov Adonai Lakol, Berachamav Al Kol Ma'asav.
יודוך אדוני כל מעשיך, וחסידיך יברכוך.
Kevod Malchutcha Yomeru, Ugvoratecha Yedaberu.
להודיע לבני האדם גבורותיו, וכבוד הדר מלכותו.
Malchutecha Malchut Kol Haolamim, Umeshatecha Bechol Dor Vador.
סומך אדוני לכל הנופלים, וזוקף לכל הכפופים.
Ene Koelecha Yisaberu, Ve'ata Noten Lahem Et Achlem Be'ito.
פותח את ידיך, ומשביע לכל חי רצון.
Tzadik Adonai Bechol Derchav, Vechasid Bechol Ma'asav.
קרוב אדוני לכל קוראיו, לכל אשר יקראוהו באמת.
Ratzon Yerayav Ya'aseh, Ve'et Shabbatam Yishma V'Yoshiem.
שומר אדוני את כל אוהביו, ואת כל הרשעים ישמיד.
Tehillat Adonai Yedaber Pi, Ve'vrach Kol Basar Shem Kacho
מעתה ועד עולם, hallelujah.
Page 218 for Hallelujah.
Hallelujah, bekadshah, hallelujah, bekia uzo, hallelujah, bigvuratav, hallelujah, kerav gudoy, kol haneshamat hallelujah, 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 kol haneshamat hallelujah, 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 beteka shofar, hallelujah, beneve v'chinon, hallelujah, betof umachol, hallelujah, beminim be'uga v'yayay, kol haneshamat hallelujah, 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 kol haneshamat hallelujah, 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 betziat leishama, hallelujah, betziat leitruah, hallelujah, betziat leishama, hallelujah, betziat leitruah, kol haneshamat hallelujah, 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 kol haneshamat hallelujah, hallelujah, hallelujah.
Nishmat kol chai tivarech et shimcha Adonai Eloheinu v'ruach kol basar tifa'er v'tiramem zicharecha makenu tamid. We turn to page 220 for Ilu Finu.
Hilufinu male shir הקיים ולשוננו רינה בידינו פרוסות כנשרי שמיים ורגלינו קלות כילות hilufinu male shir הקיים ולשוננו רינה וידינו פרוסות כנשרי שמיים ורגלינו קלות כילות אין אנחנו מספיקים להודות לך ולברך את שמך מלכנו מלך מלכי המלכים מלך מלכי המלכים אלופינו מלא שיר הקיים ולשוננו רינה וידינו פרוסות כנשרי שמיים ורגלינו קלות כילות.
For every mouth will acknowledge you, and every tongue pledge homage to you. Every knee bend in your presence. Every upright person shall bow before you. Every heart will revere you, and every innermost thought will sing to your name. And David said, let all my bones exclaim, who is like you, Adonai? As David continued, bless Adonai, O my soul, and let my inner peace praise your holy name. We turn the page for the beginning of the Shacharit service.
שוכן עד מרום וקדוש שמו, וכתוב רננו צדיקים באדוני, לישרים נאווה תהילה, בפי ישרים תתהלל, ובדברי צדיקים תתברך, ובלשון חסידים תתרומם, ובקרב קדושים תתקדש. ומקלות ריבות עמך בית ישראל, ברינה יתבהר שמך מלכנו, בכל דור ודור. ישתבח שמך לעד מלכנו, האל המלך הגדול והקדוש בשמיים ובארץ, כי לך נאה אדוני אלוהינו ואלוהי אבותינו ואמותינו, שהושבחה לב וזמרה, עוז וממשלה, נצח, גדולה וגבורה, תהילה ותפארת, קדושה ומלכות, ברכות והודאות, מעתה ועד עולם. ברוך אתה אדוני, אל מלך גדול בתשבחות, אל ההודעות אדון הנפלאות, הבוחר בשירי זמרה, מלך מלכי העולמים. We continue with Chetzi Kaddish, page 224. יתגדל ויתגדל שמי רבה, בעלמא דברך חירותי וימליך מלכותי, בחייכון וביומכון ובחיי תכל בית ישראל, בעגלה ובזמן קריב אמרו אמן. יהי שמי רבה מברך לעולם ולעלמי עלמיים, יתברך וישתבח, ויתפאר ויתרומם ויתנשא, ויתהדר ויתעלה ויתהלל, שמי קדושה בריחו, לעילם ינקו ברכתה ושירתה, תושבחתה ונחמתה, תמירן בעלמא, אמרו amen.
We turn the page for Baruch.
And rise if you are able. Baruchu et Adonai hamevorach.
Baruch Adonai HaMevorach Leolam Va'ed. We may be seated. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, yotzer or uvarei choshech, oseh shalom uvarei et hakol. In mercy you illuminated the world and those who live upon it. In your goodness you daily renew creation. How numerous are your works, Adonai! In wisdom you formed them all, filling the earth with your creatures. Be praised, Adonai our God, for the excellent work of your hands. And for the lights you created, may they glorify you. Shine a new light upon Zion, that we may all swiftly merit its radiance. Baruch atah Adonai, Yotzer HaMe'orot. We turn to page 230, and before we start Ahava Rabbah, we take a moment to reflect on this concept of Ahava Rabbah, a great or an impassioned love. And we meditate on the idea that really we ask for in this prayer of what our world would look like if everybody was able to just increase their love for one another, love for society, love for God, and love for those around us just a little bit more. Ahava Rabbah aftanu Adonai Eloheinu, chemla gadola v'yatera chemlata aleinu, ba'avor avotenu v'imotenu shubatchu b'cha, v'tamidem chukei chayim, ken techanenu utamidenu, hamerachem rachem aleinu v'tein b'libenu, lahavin ulahaskil, lishmoa, lilmod ulilamed ulishmor ulasot ulakayem, et kol divrei Talmud Toratecha be'ahava. Gather us in peace from the four corners of the earth, and lead us upright to our land. For you, O God, work wonders. You chose us. Truly, you drew us near to your great name, that we might acknowledge you, declaring you one in love. Praise be you, Adonai, who chooses your people Israel in love. Baruch atah Adonai, habocher ba'amo Yisrael be'ahava. Page 232 for Shema.
Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad. Please join me on page 234 for Ve'ahavta. Ve'ahavta et Adonai Elohecha bechol levavcha uvechol nafshecha uvechol me'odecha ve'hayu hadevarim ha'ele asher anochi mitzavecha hayom al levavecha Veshinantam nevanecha, v'dibarta bam, v'shivtecha b'veitecha, uvlechtecha v'aderech, uv'shochbecha uv'kumecha, ukshatam neot al yadecha, v'hayu letotafot b'neinecha, uchtavtam al mezuzot beitecha, uv'isheharecha. Please join me in English in the middle of page 236. Adonai said to Moses as follows, "Speak to the Israelite people and instruct them to make for themselves fringes on the corners of their garments throughout the ages. Let them attach a cord of blue to the fringe at each corner. That shall be your fringe. Look at it and recall all the commandments of Adonai and observe them, so that you do not follow your heart and eyes in your lustful urge. למען תזכרו ועשיתם את כל מצוותיי והייתם קדושים לאלוהיכם. אני אדוני אלוהיכם, אשר הוצאתי אתכם מארץ מצרים, להיות לכם לאלוהים. אני אדוני אלוהיכם, אמת.
Adonai Elohechem emet, v'yatzi v'ahuv v'chaviv v'nora v'adir, v'tov v'yafeh hadabar hazeh, aleinu le'olam va'ed. Emet Elohei olam malkeinu, tzor Yaakov magen yishenu. L'dor v'dor hu kayam, u'shmo kayam, u'kiso nachon u'malchuto v'emunato la'ad kayamet. U'dvrav chayim v'kayamim ne'emanim v'nechmadim, la'ad olamei olamim. Mimitzrayim ge'altanu Adonai Eloheinu, u'mibeit avidim piditanu. Alzot shibchu ahuvim v'romumu el v'natnu yedidim, zmirot shirot v'tishbachot brachot v'hodaot l'melech alcha v'kayam. Ram v'nisaha gadol v'nora mashpil ge'im u'magbia shefalim, motzi asirim ufode anavim v'ozer dalim, v'one le'amo be'et shavatam elav. Tehilot le'elyon barachu u'movrach, Moshe u'Miriam u'v'nei Yisrael lacha anu shimcha, v'simcha rabba v'amru kulam. Page 240 for Mi Chamocha.
Mi chamocha ba'elim Adonai, mi kamocha nehedar b'kodesh. Mi chamocha ba'elim Adonai, mi kamocha nehedar b'kodesh. Nara tehilot oseh v'ene, nara tehilot oseh v'ene. שירה חדשה שיבחו גאולים לשמך על שפת הים. שירה חדשה שיבחו גאולים לשמך על שפת הים. יחד כולם הודו והמליכו ואמרו, אדוני ימלוך לעולם ועד. צור ישראל קומה בעזרת ישראל, ופתחנו ממך יהודה וישראל. צור ישראל קומה בעזרת ישראל, דכינו ממך יהודה וישראל
Please rise in person or in spirit for the Amidah on page 242.
Adonai sefatai tiftach ufi yagid tehilatecha. Adonai, open up my lips, that my mouth may declare your praise. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu, Elohei Avotenu v'Imateinu, Elohei Avraham, Elohei Yitzchak, Elohei Yaakov, Elohei Sarah, Elohei Rivka, Elohei Rachel, Elohei Leah, Ha'el Hagadol, Hagibor v'Hanora, El Elyon, Gomeh Chasadim Tovim, V'konei Hakol, וזוכר חסדי אבות ואימהות, ומביא גאולה לבני בניהם, למען שמו באהבה. מלך עוזר ומושיע ומגן, ברוך אתה אדוני, מגן אברהם בעזרת שרה. אתה גיבור לעולם אדוני, מחיי הכל אתה רב להושיע. משיב הרוח ומוריד הגשם, מחכה חיים בחסד, מחיי הכל ברחמים רבים, סומך נופלים ורופא חולים, ומתיר אסורים, ומקיים אמונתו לשני עפר. מי כמוך בעל גבורות, ומי דומה לך, מלך ממית ומחיה, ומצמיח ישועה. ונאמן אתה להחיות הכל, ברוך אתה אדוני, מחיי הכל. נקדש את שמך בעולם, כשם שמקדישים אותו בשמי מרום, ככתוב על יד נביאך, וקרא זה ואמר, קדוש קדוש קדוש, אדוני צבאות, מלוך כל הארץ, כבודו. אדיר אדירנו אדוני אדוננו, מאדיר שמך בכל הארץ, ברוך כבוד אדוני ממקומו. אחד הוא אלוהינו, הוא אבינו, הוא מלכנו, הוא מושיענו והוא ישמיענו, ברחמיו לעיני כל חי. אני אדוני אלוהיכם, ימלוך אדוני לעולם, אלוהי ציון, לדור ודור. הללויה. לדור ודור נגיד גודלך, ולנצח נצחים קדושתך נקדיש, ושבחך אלוהינו מפינו לא ימוש לעולם ועד. ברוך אתה אדוני האל הקדוש. נסבקו. We continue now with Was Shalom at the bottom of page 260. Was Shalom bimramav, Hu yaseh shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael ve'al kol yoshvei tevel ve'imru Amen. Was Shalom bimramav, Hu yaseh shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael ve'al kol yoshvei tevel ve'imru Amen. Shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael ve'al kol yoshvei tevel ve'imru Amen.
The Shabbat right before Purim every year is one of the few Shabbatot, one of the few Shabbats a year that actually has its own name. The name of this Shabbat is Parsha Zachor, or the week of the Shabbat of memory. And not only is this one of the few Shabbatot a year that has its own special name, but it's actually, according to Jewish law, the Torah reading for this week is the only Torah reading that is actually mandated under Jewish law, as opposed to it just being a custom. And so I wanted to read the reading of Parsha Zachor and then attempt to discuss some of the deeper foundations of why perhaps this 3-verse Torah portion, this really short, really dense, and somewhat enigmatic portion, becomes so central in our tradition. Zachor et asher asa lecha Amalek baderech b'tzeitcha mimitzrayim. Remember what the nation of Amalek did to you along the way when you were coming out of Egypt. Asher karcha baderech v'yiznav becha kol hanechshalim acharecha ve'ata ayef v'yiga v'lo yira Elohim. When you were worn and weary, they met you on your journey and attacked all of those in the back. They had no fear of God. V'haya b'haniach Adonai Elohecha lecha mikol oivecha misaviv ba'eretz asher Adonai Elohecha noten lecha nachala l'rishta timcha et zecher Amalek mitachat hashamayim lo tishkach. When finally the Lord your God gives you rest from all the enemies surrounding you in your land that he is going to give you as an inheritance, you shall make sure to blot out the name of Amalek from under heaven. Do not forget. These 3 verses, which appear at the end of the 25th chapter of Deuteronomy, have multiple questions surrounding them. First, we have a textual question. There seems to be a textual problem with these verses. There's a contradiction. In the beginning, it says, after God gives you rest from all your enemies, then you should go focus your attention on Amalek, one of your enemies. Which one is it? Is this after all of the enemies are taken care of? Or is this a prescription to take care of a specific enemy? The difficulties go beyond textual. We know that there is an immense moral question in Parsha Zachor. The idea of wanting to wipe out another nation, known as genocide, is perhaps one of the worst crimes known to humanity and throughout the history of the world. And then there's, of course, the ultimate irony and paradox of Jewish tradition so badly wanting to blot out the remembrance of Amalek, and then subsequently every year reminding the world of them. This is almost as if someone says, whatever you do, don't think of the color red. And of course, the first thing that everyone does is think of the color red. If we didn't every single year remind the world and the Jewish community of this nation called Amalek, probably nobody would have remembered them for the last 2,000 or 3,000 years. So in the late 19th century, after the Enlightenment, after the Haskalah, teams of biblical historians and archaeologists began to scan ancient Israel and the wider Levant, looking for archaeological artifacts and proofs that can help put together a more complete picture of the biblical narrative. And teams of archaeologists spent generations and decades, and scholars spent times digging all around the Sinai, digging all around Israel. And they found a whole variety of fascinating stelas. They found a whole bunch of papyruses, and they sort of were able to put back together a picture of what life might have been like 3,000-4,000 years ago during the biblical period. And one of the fascinating things that the scholars note is the Torah frequently talks about other nations that are surrounding Israel. And archaeologists have actually found proof that all of these ancient nations existed. The Assyrians, the Hittites, the Egyptians, of course, the Canaanites, the Philistines. The only nation they actually were never able to figure out existed, the only nation in which we actually have zero mention of in history outside of the Torah, is Amalek. And many archaeologists are puzzled by this. Who is this enemy that was so hated by the ancient Israelite community that they have this prescription to wipe them out, but they actually don't seem to exist outside of Jewish memory? So we know over the last generation and decade of psychological research there's been much discussion about this idea of memory. We know that memory isn't just a factual recording of what happened in the past, but memory is actually this extremely malleable conception of how we view ourselves, how we view our personal narrative. And actually, even more fascinating about memory is the way that we act today can actually change how we view our past. The decisions that we make today and the values in which we live our life by today, actually in the way that we conceive of past events, can actually shape and mold how we view our past. It seems that in Judaism, we know that memory is proscriptive, not descriptive. Our memory is not necessarily a set of detailed facts, but it's a set of values intertwined into narrative that help dictate how we view our lives moving forward. So who was Amalek? So we know that Amalek, according to the biblical narrative, according to what we just read, were a nation that attacked the Israelites as they were leaving Egypt. But they didn't attack the front, as you might expect ancient warfare to happen. They specifically ambushed from the back. They went at the weakest link. All the people who we could imagine in the arduous journey throughout the desert out of Egypt, all of the people who we might have imagined were at the back for a whole variety of purposes. That's who Amalek decided to attack. And the Torah specifies that they have no fear of God. And we need to be careful here. This isn't a religious tirade. Judaism does not preach by any extent of the imagination, going around and punishing those who refuse to accept religious dogmas. When the Torah says that Amalek had no fear of God, this is a moral statement. This isn't a statement of action. We know that God in Judaism is perhaps much less important as a theological tenet, but God is a moral precept and moral foundation. We know the Jewish idea that there is one God, that one God creating humans in God's image, and the subsequent moral code that goes along with that is one that preaches for radical equality among people. Imagine even today, if every person in every society truly internalized and acted in line with the moral belief that every single human is fundamentally equal. Furthermore, we know that the subsequent biblical narrative after God freeing the Israelites from Egypt is one of them being led throughout the desert. The Torah, as opposed to just given to the upper class in society, as opposed to the Torah just being given to perhaps the priests or the leaders of the tribe, was actually given to all of Israel at once, a type of democratic nature of knowledge disseminated throughout our tradition. This is so important in our tradition that one rabbinic midrash even comments on the fact that the Torah was given in the middle of a desert, and the rabbis are a little confused. The rabbis ask, why was the Torah not given in Jerusalem? Why was it not given on maybe Har HaBayit, the Temple Mount, or another place or physical location that we know to be very important? Why was it given in the middle of a desert on a mountain that, wasn't particularly important or physically attractive? And the rabbis answer that it's because the desert is a place of ownerlessness. A desert isn't somewhere where you walk through and okay, somebody owns this and somebody owns that, and this person's house is bigger, or this tribe has a bigger rule over this land. The desert is a place where everybody has an equal stake in it. And these ideas, this idea that no one group can claim a monopoly over Torah, the idea of the radical equality, the idea that God would care enough to take the lowliest of nations and nations of slaves and servants out of the Egyptian hegemony after what was the greatest nation in the Iron Age. Amalek and what Amalek represented couldn't stand this. Amalek, whatever Amalek represents, was not able to internalize and was not able to jive with the radical message of equality, the radical message of democracy, the radical message of freedom that we know that the ancient Jewish tradition and the Israelites tried and continue to spread throughout the world. Biblical etymologists try to figure out what Amalek comes from, because given that we haven't found Amalek in any ancient sources but the Torah, it's actually really hard to deconstruct what the word means, what ancient language it was written. But one scholar says that Amalek is actually a combination of two words, the word which we know means nation, and to malek, or malika in biblical Hebrew, means to wring something out. So if we have a wet towel and we wrung out that towel, that is called malika. So this scholar interprets Amalek as a nation of wringers, a nation of people who wanted to specifically target the lowest down on the totem pole and does whatever they can to ensure that equality and this radical message of freedom doesn't happen. We know that when it comes to history, history is a set of facts. History is an academic discipline. But when it comes to memory, when it comes to the Jewish idea of zachor, memory is values. History is geared towards the past. It's backwards facing. But memory looks towards the future. We don't recall Amalek, we don't recall Parsha Zachor because we're particularly interested in a desert skirmish that may or may not have happened in the late Iron Age period. Perhaps even, as archaeologists want to suggest, Amalek never existed as a literal entity. But we know that in each and every one of us, perhaps there's a little bit of Amalek. In every society in the history of the world, perhaps there's a little bit of Amalek. A little bit of that voice arguing and railing against equality, against freedom. So again, we remember Amalek, not because we're looking backwards, but because it reinforces the highest ideal of what we are trying to accomplish as a Jewish community moving towards the future. Shabbat Shalom. We now ask Rabbi Miriam to be our Gabbai.
Shabbat Shalom. We turn to Parashat Truma from the book of Exodus, and we call for the first Aliyah. Yamdu, Yahamdu, Shmuel ben Asher v'Fern, Frida Emuna bat Yaakov Lev, the Yehuda Vega, and Chava and Amelia, Scott and Jen Weissman and family.
Baruch Adonai Hamvorach.
Baruch Adonai Hamvorach le'olam va'ed.
Baruch Adonai Hamvorach le'olam va'ed. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher bachar banu mikol ha'amim, v'natan lanu et Torato. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah.
Amen. And chanting Torah will be Michael Bell. Unmute yourself. There you go.
Amen. V'yadaber Adonai el Moshe lemor. Daber el bnei Yisrael v'yichehu li terumaha ve'at kol ish esher yedvenuhu lebo techehuhu et haterumatihi v'zot haterumaha asher techehuhu me'ataham Zahav v'kesef v'nehoshet u'tehelet v'argaman v'tola ahat shenehe v'shehes v'eitzim.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher natan lanu Torah temet, v'chayei olam nata betochenu. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah.
Amen. Yasher Koach. For the second Aliyah, Yamdu, Yamdu, Tzidel Rivka, Bat Shmuel Valeya, Lila Pesner, and our chanter will be Mark Filowitz.
Oh, Lila, we can't hear you. Okay. I will read your lips and I will respond. Go ahead. Baruch Adonai Mevarach Leolam Va'ed.
Amen. V'yorot elim adamim, v'yorot techashim, v'atzei shitim, shemen lemaor bashamim, l'shemen hamishcha, liktoret chasamim, avnei shecham v'avnei miluim, l'hafot lecha choshen.
Amen.
Yasher Koach. For the third Aliyah, Yamdu, Yamdu, Yikasiel Gabriel ben Baruch Halevi, Vitziro Leah Nahuma, Steve Velasco, and chanting will be Evelyn Bell.
Baruch Hu et Adonai Hamvorach.
Baruch Adonai Mevarach Leolam Va'ed.
Baruch Adonai Vorach Leolam Va'ed. Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu Melech Olam Asher Bachar Banu Mikol Hamim V'natan Lanu et Torato. Baruch Atah Adonai Noten HaTorah.
Amen. Vahasu lihi mehakadash vishahanti bihaham kehu asher ani merech echoti ad et tavit hamesh chahan biaet tave vivu koket lav vakayen ta'asu v'asua aron azeh shitin amatayim rahatzi karu vahama ahitzi rabo vahitzi komato.
Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu Melech Olam Asher Natan Lanu Torah Emet V'chayei Olam Nota B'tochenu. Baruch Atah Adonai Noten HaTorah.
Amen. For the Maftir, we call to the Torah, yours truly, Yam Tamod, Tamod, Harav Miriam Shoshana, Bat Farfel Ve'Esther, Rabbi Miriam Van Ralt. And chanting will be Gabrielle Newman. Baruch Hu et Adonai Hamvorach.
Baruch Adonai Mevarach Leolam Va'ed.
Baruch Adonai Hamvorach Leolam Va'ed. Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu Melech HaOlam Asher Bachar Banu Mikol Ha'amim V'natan Lanu et Torato. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah.
Amen. Zachor et asher asa lecha Amalek baderech be'etchem mimitzrayim asher korcha baderech vayezanev becha kohaneche shalim acharecha ve'ata ayev ve'yagea ve'lo yarei Elohim ve'haya behaniach Adonai Elohecha lecha mikol oivecha misaviv ba'aretz asher Adonai Elohecha noten lecha nachala lerishta timche et zecher Amalek mitachat hashamayim lo tishkach.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher natan lanu Torat emet v'chaye olam nata b'tochenu. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah.
Amen.
We now turn to page 370 for the Mishu Beirach of everybody who received an Aliyah. Mishu Beirach Abotenu v'Imotenu Abraham, Yitzchak v'Yaakov, Sarah, Rivka, Rachel v'Leah, Hu Yavarach et Kol Ha'olim, L'chvod HaMakom, L'chvod HaTorah, B'schar zeh HaKadosh Baruch Hu Yishmarehu v'Yatzilehu, Mikol Tzara Utsuka, Umikol Nega Umachla, V'yishlach bracha v'hatzlacha b'chol maseh yadehem im kol Yisrael v'nomar amen. We turn to page 371, and before we do the Mishu Beirach for healing, we take a moment and keep in mind any members in our own community that may be in need of any healing, be it any type of physical healing, any type of mental or emotional healing, or any type of addiction. Mi sheberach avotenu v'imotenu, Abraham, Yitzchak, v'Yaakov, Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, v'Leah, hu yivarech et hacholim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu yimalei rachamim aleihem, lahachmilam ulerefuatam, ulahachzikam v'yishlach lahem mehira refuah, refuah shalema min hashamayim, refuat hanefesh v'refuat haguf, Hashta ba'agala uvizman kariv v'nomar amen. May the one who blessed our ancestors, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, and Leah, bless and heal all those who are ill. May the blessed Holy One be filled with compassion for their health to be restored and for their strength to be revived. May God swiftly send them a complete renewal of body and a renewal of spirit. And let us say, Amen. We turn to page 598 for the Mourner's Kaddish. And again, we take a moment to keep in mind anyone in our community who is mourning, whether it's in the Shiva period, the 7 days after the passing of a loved one, the Shloshim period, the first month after a passing, or a yahrzeit. Please rise in body or in spirit for the Mourner's Kaddish on page 598. Yitkadal v'yitkadash shemei rabbah, v'yama di barak kiratei v'yamlich malchutei, v'chayechon uvyomechon uv'chayed chol beit Yisrael, ba'agala uv'zman kariv v'yimru amen. Yehi Shmei Rabba Mevarach Leolam Omei Omaya. Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitba'ar v'yitramam v'yitnaseh v'yithadar v'yitale v'yitalal Shmei Dekudisha B'richu Le'elamin kol bechata v'shirata tush bechata v'nechamata Daminan be'ama v'emru amen Yehi Shalom Rabba min Shemaya v'chayim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'emru amen Oseh Shalom bin Ramav hu ya'aseh Shalom aleinu Ve'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen. You may be seated. Before we conclude services with Ein Kelohenu, a public service announcement that Purim is this week, and there are tons of great events for families, events for individuals happening all throughout the week. Starting Wednesday, we have events Thursday, we have events over Shabbat, and over Sunday. So make sure to check the TBT website or check the Facebook for all the information about the variety of Purim events happening this week. We turn to Ein Kelohenu for the conclusion of services.
It can be found on page 631. Ein Kelohenu, Ein Kadonenu, Ein Kemalkeinu, Ein Kemoshienu. Non como nuestro Dios, non como nuestro Señor, non como nuestro Rey, non como nuestro Salvador. Mi Eloheinu, mi Adonenu, mi Malkeinu, mi Moshienu. ¿Quién como nuestro Dios? ¿Quién como nuestro Señor? ¿Quién como nuestro Rey? ¿Quién como nuestro Salvador? No del Eloheinu, no del Adonenu, no del Malkeinu, no del Moshienu. Lo haremos a nuestro Dios, lo haremos a nuestro Señor, lo haremos a nuestro Rey, lo haremos a nuestro Salvador. Baruch Eloheinu, Baruch Adonenu, Baruch Malkeinu, Baruch Moshienu. Bendito nuestro Dios, bendito nuestro Señor, bendito nuestro Rey, bendito nuestro Salvador. Atahu Eloheinu, Atahu Adonenu, Atahu Malkeinu, Atahu Moshienu. Tú sos nuestro Dios, tú sos nuestro Señor, tú sos nuestro Rey, tú sos nuestro Salvador. Shabbat Shalom, everybody.